Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tur Bet Yosef, where we work on learning from the bottom line of the Gemara through understanding the Shulchan Aruch. Today we're learning Siman Tav Resh Ayin Gimel, which are the laws of Hanukkah, how to light, what to light with, and we will begin from Seif Aleph. The beginning of the Siman discusses which wicks and oils can be used to light Ner Hanukkah. There's discussion in the Gemara. The Gemara brings three opinions, and the Gemara says that the quality and the wicks that are allowed to be used is dependent on two other halachot. On Shabbat, for example, we know that we want to have good wicks. Shabbat, everyone agrees that the halacha is that you have to have good wicks, and in order so that it doesn't flicker and that the candle should be lit well. Now, one of the halachot it's based on is because you're actually allowed to use the candles on Shabbat, and therefore we're afraid that if the wicks or the oil isn't good, you might come to tilt it. On Hanukkah, however, there's a discussion. There's another component here. There's a component whether you'll use it. Whereas, as we know, the Gemara discusses whether or not you're allowed to use the lights of Hanukkah. We're posek that you are not allowed to use the light of Hanukkah. There's also another discussion whether or not kavta zakukla or not, which means once I light the Hanukkah candles, do I have to have it lit for a half hour, or is it good enough that it's lit for a second? The Gemara says, since you just have to light it for a second, kavta en zakukla, you aren't required to relight it. Therefore, you can use any kind of oil. You can use any kind of wick. Because if you lit it, you're done with the mitzvah. We're not worried that you're gonna go back and do it. And also, since it's a shiur to use the light of the Hanukkah candles, therefore you can use any. So much so, we're not worried that you're going to relight it. Even on the Shabbat Hanukkah, you can use all of the wicks for the Hanukkah candles that general you can't even use for Shabbat. Why? Because the same rule applies. We're not worried that you're going to relight it. And since it's asur to use the candles, it's fine to use oils and wicks that are not good. The Bet Yosef brings a Tshuvat Rashba, who says that this is only good for the half-hour period that you're asur to use the candles for. The first half hour, you're not allowed to use it. As you mentioned in the previous shiur, after a half hour, you can use the candles, says the Rashba. Therefore, you can only put enough oil. If you're using bad oil or bad wicks, you can only put a half hour's worth. After the half hour, it'd be a problem. And therefore, he says, on the weekday, for sure, put the right amount. And on Shabbat, try to put a little bit, eyeball it, so to speak, and put a little bit extra so that obviously you have a half hour. But we're not worried if you put, a drop more. But he says you cannot put a lot of oil, and you can't have it lit all night, because therefore you'd have a problem. The Maran and the Rama bring this deen, and I'll read you the Lashon of Maran. Kol hashemanim ha'petilot kesherim l'nei Hanukkah, v'af api she'en hashemanim nimshachim achar ha'petila, ve'en ha'or nitle yafeh be'otam ha'petilot, even if they don't light well. Says the Rama, Va'afilu b'leilei Shabbat, Maran continues, Va'afilu b'leilei Shabbat, שבתוך ימי חנוכה, מותר להדליק בנר חנוכה שמנים הפתילות שאסור להדליק בהם נר שבת. The Rama brings from the Rashba, like we mentioned, אם אינו נותן בנר, רק כדי שיעור מצוותו, as long as you only put the amount for the shiur mitzvato. Why? לפי שאסור להשתמש בנר חנוכה בין שבת בין בחול. For the sake of clarity, I sometimes jump around in Maran when we give the psak. I'm working on the flow of the ideas, and as you'll see, I jump around between the seifim in order to show what the bottom line of the psak is. In Seif Bet, Maran brings the deen of kavta en zakukla, and therefore writes, Hadlaka oseh mitzvah. The mitzvah of Nerot Hanukkah is to light the candles. It's not that they should be lit, it's to light them. And therefore, leficha, im kavta kodem she'avar zmanam, even if they went out before the half-hour period, and no zakukla, you are not required to relight them. Even on Erev Shabbat, the Bet Yosef brings from the Trumat edition that even on Erev Shabbat, if it goes out, even though we're lighting before Shigiyah, earlier on in the day, since you lit at the right time, even if it goes out, it's not necessarily to relight it. V'chen, the Bet Yosef brings a tshuva from the Rashba. Rashba was discussing when a person is trying to fix, he lit it, but it just didn't light well. And then he tried too much and it went out. Do you have to relight that? He says, even then you don't have to relight it. And that's Lashon Maran. Since you lit it for some period, even though almost right away you put it out, still enot zakukla. In that same teshuvah, when the Rashba was asked whether he should relight it once he extinguished it by mistake, he says at the end, "V'imbad lahadlika eno mevarech alea de mitzvat hadlaka ha'avta." He already did the mitzvah hadlaka, and therefore he definitely shouldn't do a mitzvah. He shouldn't make a bracha. The Rama brings his deen, and he says, "V'imrotzeh lachmir ala atzmo v'lasol hadlika and levarech alea," which is from the same tshuvat Rashba that the Bet Yosef brings. So we see clearly here that kavta in zakukla, once you light it, you did the mitzvah, and it's not necessary. The Aharonim do discuss whether or not it's good to do it, and if it be Amayen, Mishnah Berurah, Hazon Ovadia, all discuss the topic. The way in the Siman is what kind of oil to use. The Bet Yosef brings from the Rokeach that Shemet Zayit is the best. Some say because that's the mitzvah, it was done b'Shemet Zayit. The Rama brings that it's also good from the Maharil to use Shemet Zayit. However, he does say that the minhag, it sounds like the minhag in Ashkenaz from the Aram Eterna and the Sefer Menachim, is that they would use wax. They would say the chava is mina muvchar because wax does light like oil. However, it seems from the other poskim that oil is best, and the Raman here does bring that even though you can use everything, like we learned in Sif Aleph, that any kind of oil and any kind of wick is good. Miu shemen zayit mitzvah min hamuvchar. V'yimed shemen zayit matzui mitzvah b'shmanim she'oran zach v'naki. The Rama says definitely the mitzvah is preferable to do with good lighting oils. And the Minhag Ashkenaz seems to be with wax candles. Our next discussion is how can the candles be used? What kind of utilization of the light is allowed? So the Tur and the Bet Yosef bring three opinions to discuss this topic. The Gemara uses a lashon that says very interestingly. It says, Asur le'artzot ma'ot keneged nerot Chanukah. The halakha of the Gemara is that you cannot sort of look at coins to see, what the value is or what year they were to decipher. You can't put them against the light of the Hanukkah in order to decipher what kind of coins there are. Now, the Rishonim learn this Gemara a little bit differently, and therefore you're going to see where the difference in halakha comes from. The Baal HaYitur learns that the Gemara is only talking about a mundane use. However, if you're using it for Kedusha, if you're using it to learn, for example, so definitely it wouldn't be considered a bizui mitzvah. The Gemara's problem is that you're showing a bizayon. You're disgracing the nerot by doing a mundane act next to it. However, if you would learn or do another mitzvah, it for surely would be okay. However, the Rosh and the Ran argue. The Rosh and the Ran both argue on the Baal HaYitur, but they say it differently. That's why we're considering it three opinions. First, we have the opinion of Baal HaYitur, who says that tashmish of Kedusha is allowed. The Ran says that even a tashmish of mitzvah is asur. Why? Because since the miracle happened with the menorah and the Beit HaMikdash, therefore the Chachamim instituted the mitzvah of lighting the candles in a similar fashion. And therefore, just like in the menorah, we cannot use the light of the menorah. Therefore, it will be asur to use the light of the Hanukkah, of the Hanukkiyah. The Ran asks on himself, why did Shmuel choose such a Rav in the Gemara chose an example to look at the coins. Why didn't he tell us even a tashmish of Kedusha, even of learning is asur? He says, because even a tashmish that's a simple use, which is just to look at the kid, just to look at the light, is asur. And therefore, whether or not it's a tashmish of Kedusha, whether tashmish of Chol, everything is asur, even something that's an easy maybe even could be done for a few seconds. It's also asur. He brings it to Yerushalmi, and also the Rambam would hold that way. When the Rosh brings his deen, he says it in a similar way to the Ran. However, the way the Rosh defines the Isur is that you cannot use a tashmish arai shel genai, which means a temporary use that's not befitting, that's not mechubad, it's not respectful. Like you said, that's how he says using the coins against the candles. Why? Because you're putting your hand right next to the candles, and it's not so proper to do it. Says the Bet Yosef, it would sound like from the Rosh that what if you would do something that was not Genai? You would do something that's a little bit further. You don't put your hands up to the candles and be a little bit further. It sounds like from the Rosh it'd be allowed. And therefore the Bet Yosef asks, why doesn't the Tur or Rabbeinu Yerukam, who is a Talmid of the Rosh, who brings the dinim of the Rosh, why don't they say that the Rosh would allow such a use that's not Shel Genai? As we've mentioned previously, the Shulchan Aruch almost always follows the ruling of the Rambam. And here also, we see that the Rambam is like the Yerushalmi and the Ran, and therefore, Maran in the Shulchan Aruch says, Asur l'ishtamesh b'nei Hanukkah ben b'Shabbat ben b'chol, afilu libdok ma'ot, or limnotan le'ora asur, afilu tashmish kedusha, kegon l'lmod le'ora asur. And then Maran says, V'yesh misha matir b'tashmish shel kedusha. This is what's called a stam v'yesh. Maran brings the first opinion, the stam, meaning without saying it's in the name of someone, yesh misha omer, it sounds like it's the simple stam halacha. And then he says, V'yesh misha omer, shematir b'tashmish kedusha. Then he brings the opinion of the Balai Tur, which is not a single opinion. There are other Rishonim, the Shibulei Aleket, also brings that you can do it like the Balai Tur. However, like we know, Stam v'yesh, halakha kistam. There is a Biur Halacha who discusses what about learning ve'ofen arai, learning for a short period against the candles, and he brings, can we rely on the yesh misha matir for, you need to look up a halakha or something like that, Hayyin b'biur halakha. So the Hazon Avadia discusses this topic. The next topic in our Siman is the Ner Nosaf, which is called the Shamash, but not everyone uses the term Shamash. So we'll call it the extra candle, the Ner Nosaf. Rabbeinu Yerukam, the student of the Rosh, does bring 3 halachot regarding to the extra candle. One, he said, we add extra candle because it's a shiur to use the nero, like we mentioned. So therefore, we want to have an extra candle that if someone needs a use, he'll use the extra candle. The second one is that it must be separate, because otherwise all of them will be considered litzorko, right? If all the candles are all mixed together, then it'll look like that they're all for his use. However, he mentions that if you do light in a place where generally nobody needs light, so therefore you don't need an extra candle, because the only time you need an extra candle is when you're lighting in a place where everyone needs illumination. You can imagine without electricity, there would probably be a lot of lanterns scattered across the home, right? And therefore, we don't want the Hanukkah to look or to be used like the other lanterns, and therefore, we have to add an extra candle. The Bet Yosef says, since we light by the petach, again, like we've mentioned earlier, the Bet Yosef is always saying that we light by the entranceway to the house, right? It says, since we light there, and it's a place where nobody has illuminations. I guess you didn't have, those lights outside his pathway, lighting in the street, right? So he says, you don't even need an Ner Nosaf there. However, he says everyone does it, and he says it must be that the Chachamim realized that not everybody can make a distinction whether or not you're going to need extra candle. And since people who aren't as learned might use the candles of the Chanukiah, therefore Chachamim instituted that everyone should light an extra candle, and therefore you won't have any issues. Sort of a lo pluk. So the Chachamim made a halakha, and therefore they're not going to make a distinction between the different scenarios. He does bring a Mordechai, that Mordechai says that since we want to make a distinction, we make the candle higher. And therefore you'll see sometimes that the Hanukkah, the extra candle, is higher or lower as a distinction that it's a different candle. The Tur brings a question that was posed to his brother, Rabbeinu Yechiel, who has question and answers. And he says, what about if a person lit stam? He didn't designate which candle is the shamash. He didn't say, is it the one in the beginning, the one in the middle, the one in the end? Which candle should it be? He answers, Tshuva, Nerot Chanukah, and Lafsik Bahen. When you light the Hanukkah candles, right after you say the bracha, it's the first candle, the second candle, or the whatever night it is. Let's say it's the fifth night. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It says only the last candle should be used as the extra ner, because you want to light your Hanukkah candles consecutively. He also mentions that this is not the shamash, because the shamash is the candle that lights the other candles. And we're going to see how the Rama also brings that there's a difference between the extra candle and then the candle that lights all the candles. Maran says, "V'nohagim." You see, the Lashon of Maran is nohagim because, as he mentioned in the Bet Yosef, it's really a minhag because it's only necessary from the letter of the law in a place where you would use the candle, but in a place where you wouldn't come to use the candle, it might not be necessary. He says, nevertheless, nohagim ladik ner nosaf k'dei she'im yishtamesh l'ora yeh le'ora nosaf shu oto shehudlak aharon. Like the Rabbeinu Yechiel said, the brother of the Rosh, that it's the last candle. Says the Rama, in our lands, we don't add a candlelight to Shulchan. Says, you use the candle that you lit all the other nerot where you lit the obligatory candles, and then you sort of, maybe heat the bottom of the wax candle and then put it down. And he says, that's the Rama. The Bet Yosef continues, and he brings an interesting question asked to the Trumat edition. What if you have nerot that are permissible and nerot isur? The Bet Yosef brings a Trumat edition who was asked the following question. If people lit in a house and the candles got mixed, meaning they had a shamash and a candle that's asur to use, meaning a candle of chiyuv, and the candles got mixed, can you use the candles? Meaning, if they got mixed, we want to say, is there a din of bitul barot? The Trumat edition answers that since we learn in the Gemara in Masechet Betzah that anything that has a number, anything that you use and that you count, cannot be nullified. This also has that same din, and therefore it's davar shebeminyan, and therefore it's asur. The Darkei Moshe explains that the concept here is using each candle on its own. However, if you use all the candles themselves, meaning if you had a few candles and you want to just benefit from them all together and not focus in on one candle, it would be allowed. That's how he explains the Trumat edition. We can argue and discuss whether or not the Bet Yosef would agree to his explanation. Okay, that takes a little bit more of brain power. Says the Rama, Im nitarev ner Hanukkah ha'asur behana'a mish'ar nerot, afilu ehad be'elif lo batil. If one candle that's asur to use, or for example, it's a candle that went out, Mishnah Berurah explains, within a half hour, which is asur to use, and they got mixed up, it's not batil. David davar shel minyan. Ela, what should you do? Elig min taravot kol kach, shebevadai ner shel heter dolek im ner shel isur, be'az mutar lishtamesh etzlan. When you put them all together, it's allowed. We now move on to what type of Chanukiah can be used, should not be used. The Tur brings din from Maharam Merotenberg that's based on the Masechet Sofrim, which says, En madlikin b'ner yeshan. Do not use an old candle. The candles of old were clay pottery and weren't even put in the kiln, and once you use them, they became disgusting. Therefore, you're not supposed to use it because it's not mechubad, it's not proper and respectful for the mitzvah. However, if that's the only thing you have, milabeno ba'ur yafeh. Put it in the oven so that it becomes a little hard and it becomes sort of like ceramic. Therefore, he says, if you have a metal candle, it's no problem. You don't need a new one. If it's chuchit, if it's glass, or cheres mitzupeh, if it's fine china or pottery that has a glaze on it, it's like metal and it's not a problem. Bet Yosef brings that also other opinions, the Hagor Maminiot, the Mordechai, bring this din as well as the Shibud Eleket. Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch reads as follows: Ner shel cheres shelipo laila achat. If you use the pottery candle for the one night, naaseh yashan, it became old. Ve'en madlikim bo laila acheret, because it became disgusting. Ela lokiach chadashim b'chol laila. If the only thing you have is pottery, like pottery candles, you should have a new one each night. If that's the only thing you have, masiko b'chol laila ba'ur. Every night you should put it in the fire so that it becomes sort of hardened and sort of more befitting for the mitzvah. And neshamateket elo tzarich hadash. A metal one does not need anything, does not need new. You could reuse a metal hanukiah, b'shel zchukit or shel cheres mechuseh, dino kematefet. And if you look at the Aharonim, they discuss whether you should have a gold one, a silver one, so on and so forth. The last din is a din that the Bet Yosef does not bring a Gemara, but generally the Simanim in the Tur begin with the dinim focused that come and stem from the Gemara, and at the end of the Siman, if there's a din that's brought from the Rishonim or from other sources, it's brought at the end of the Siman. Here again, there's a din the Bet Yosef brings, not brought in the Tur, but the Bet Yosef brings that in the name of the Shibud Eleket, that you can reuse the pitilot. You could reuse the wicks every night. It's not necessary to change them. The Derkei Moshe also brings in the name of Abu Darham, Rabbi Devi Abu Darham, you don't have to change the wicks, but there is a custom to change them, and the Kobo says that the custom was to change them. Maran brings in the Shulchan Aruch, and Hosheshim lePtilot lahachlifam ashetichle. It's not necessary to change the wicks unless they already are unfit for use, and therefore you should obviously change them. Interesting to note that the Ramah does not say that the custom is. Generally, the Ramah does bring the customs. Here he doesn't bring the custom. If anyone has an answer why he doesn't, I'd love to know. Hanukkah Sameach.